Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And of course CCP dropped that stream with all the Triglavian lore, basically hyping up what's coming next week, the start of Eclipse, the third and normally final chapter in the Triglavian storyline. They'll probably come back in full force, invade us, we'll have a choice. Do we want to help the Triglavians? Do we want to help Eden come? And then, our actions will probably help determine the story. I don't think it'll determine the outcome of whether or not the Triglavians make a comeback, but perhaps it could determine where they'll establish themselves. It was very cool, and I am definitely very hyped for that. From the ticker, you may already notice I'm getting the first inklings that the market is maybe taking a little bit of a break, is in a bit of a wait and see pattern as well, knowing that this is on the horizon. And I actually think that this is cool. We really don't know what to expect. I made a whole video about it. It's all pure speculation and probably wishful thinking, but it could be very cool. And something that I actually forgot to mention is that there does also seem to be, from some leaks and some digging that people have done on this server, a mechanic that will change the security status potentially of systems, or another option could be that if Concord can't be the ones to defend the high-sec system anymore, perhaps Triglavians will have a police force that does that job instead. And so you have to be aligned with the Triglavians in order to basically get that protection there as well. It could be really cool. I can't wait to see how all of this plans out. And I will try to see if there's any impact on the market. As I've said, I think right now there won't be a lot, except maybe one thing for the real speculators. We know it was definitely confirmed on the stream, I think by CCP Delegate 0, that the Triglavians use something called Isogen 10 as basically a power source for their technology. Isogen 5 is the Jamil Sarum weapon, and we know also from the trailer that a new type of weapon is coming on the Edencom ships. So I wonder if CCP will try to do something with Isogen, which is like really cheap, oversupplied massively in the game right now. Perhaps give us the ability to refine that into Isogen 5, Isogen 10, depending on the site that we choose, and thus create much more demand for the mineral. That would be my gamble after watching the stream. Not that I'm gonna buy a massive amount of Isogen, but perhaps I'll just, try to stock up a little bit or something like that on the mineral, just in case. Anyways, let's get started here with a quick look at the new Eden store. There is not much to report here. Dragon Phoenix skin still showing up as new, but other than that we don't have any sales or anything special. That's probably going to be for next week, when of course CCP will try to build up some hype for the Eclipse, so we can move straight on to the market. And then we get to start at some with some plex and stuff, coming in at 320. Like that. And let's get started here with plex. You can see in JITA 2,644,000 disc, which is pretty much the same price as last week. Buyers are up to just above 2.4 million. Well, no, a little bit, a decent amount above 2.4 million. And you can see here on that daily average that we are stalling. We did go below 2.5 million on the average price, but the market doesn't want to go that much lower anymore. So very interesting. Outside of the trade hubs, because of course this is dominated now quite a lot by the Perimeter Tranquility Trading Tower, 2.6 million for the sellers, and the buyers go up, well, very slightly to 459. That's not a lot of margin, but you can basically buy plex for less than 2.5 million if you look at these averages, around 2.5 million today so far, which I think, if you look at this full 1 year chart again, does make a lot of sense if you want that plex investment. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificate that is now selling for 1.3 billion, and the buyers are above 1.2 billion. We can see here that the chart is doing the same thing, and this is really, to me, starting to feel like a true bottom, a true turnaround. You can see the 5-day moving average here is already starting to edge up, basically a bounce off of the 1.25 billion mark on the chart, and it would make sense to me that this could be where a little bit of risk is starting to flow because of the Eclipse, of course, because of the potential hype that this will bring to the game. Perhaps older players that come back to take a look at it. They'll want some plex in order to get that 30 days game time in without needing to use their credit card. Newer players may come in as well and find it interesting enough that they'll want to Omega, and perhaps, you know, they'll want to use the in-game currency in order to do that. If you look at the price of these trading certificates and the plex right now, of course, on this chart, it does look like a great time to try and do so. The skill extractors next, very same thing. You can see again, to my surprise, we did go through the 300 million mark on the downside, 290 or something like that, but again the daily averages are going back up. 5-day moving average is also showing its first sign of recovery, so this to me does feel a lot like a bottom forming. 290 million pretty much for the sellers, 278 million for the buyers, narrowing margin there as well for sure. On the skill injector market, we've got the large skill injectors that are finally stalling as well. 1 year low point decently pronounced. We started off at 1 billion ISK for a large skill injector, and oh, this is what's wrong. There we go. Now that's the full 1 year. So we start off at 1 billion, and it keeps moving whenever okay, we'll use this then, I think. And we're stopping above 700 million, although the buyers are at 690, so you can probably grab a large scale injector for less than 700 million. Again, for the longer term, I do think that this makes sense to try as an investment. I really like large scale injectors because they have that double component. A big part of this decline here will be the decline in plex prices as well, but because you have SP, which at the moment has been quite plentiful, CCP is giving quite a few of those for the login rewards, there should be lower demand on that as well, and that's a bit of a speculative aspect to the large scale injectors that at the right time can mean very good profits, because it's not just a hedge against inflation, which I would say ISK inflation, which I would say plex definitely is. The small scale injector is also stalling, actually continuing to go down a little bit more on that 5-day moving average. So if you don't want to pony up like 700 million ISK for a large one, 145 million for the sellers of small scale injectors, and 139 for the buyers. So you can buy these below 140 million ISK, which again they started the year at a bit above 200 million. So that's definitely a serious potential on the upside. Keep in mind though, we also got that new economical report. I didn't go through it in detail just yet, but ratting income seems to be down substantially across the board because of changes to supers, and as a result that also does mean that there is less inflation, less ISK availability. The existing ISK in the game may just increase in value, and that of course would put a downward pressure on all of these items as well. This is not a sure thing, but if you look at this chart, it really does look like a good time to at least do some investing. The daily alpha injectors are actually continuing their downtrend and are heading back for that 30 million low point, 32.7 million for the sellers and 29 million for the buyers. So you can already try and grab some daily alpha injectors for less than 30 million ISK, which is actually pretty cheap, I think, but it is only for alpha clones, of course. And then finally we have the hypercore that is also doing another step down, landing on the 280,000 mark, 274 in fact for the sellers and 265,000 for the buyers. Again, lowering the price here. Deflation in the price of these goods, that actually does mean that, you know, you can buy more hypercores with your ISK, which means that your ISK actually has increased in value. So try to keep it a little bit balanced across all these things, I think, and take the right gambles at the right time. Always very difficult to do, but if I look at this plex chart, for instance, it looks really interesting. Next up, the mineral market coming in at 920. And here I think we saw the first sign of some stalling, so titanium on the chart landing on the 8 ISK and starting to move sideways. The sellers in JITA are coming in at 830, which is pretty much the same price as last week, 777 for the buyers. And what's really noticeable are these volumes, 28 million units, 36 million units, 45 million units. I mean, this full front page here, you gotta go down a decent amount to get 100 million and then eventually a 1.1 1 billion volume sell orders at 876. Pretty damn expensive, but this could go back up very quickly on more problems. And let's keep one thing in mind. If there's one thing that miners don't like, it's the triglavians or danger or being potentially bothered in their mining activities. And the eclipse with the triglavians, I mean, we get a huge list of systems that they could hit. Their invasions span multiple systems almost every time. And as a result, this could also be very disruptive for quite a bit of mining. You can already see that the volumes are a lot lower than what we saw during the time of Plentiful. I mean, orders of 2 billion, 4 billion were definitely seen on the market then and always on that front page competing with one another. All of that has gone down substantially, and so here we have a stalling at a very good price. 8 ISK for titanium is actually pretty expensive, even historically speaking. Even before the time of Plentiful, this was a really good price for titanium, more than fair, I would say. And I would not be surprised if the eclipse continues the drought, continues the problems. On top of that, my speculation is that you could be helping both sides out with mining, with industry, by giving them stuff or selling stuff to them. Which could also become a bit of a resource sink. So this could get very, very interesting in the mineral market. For pyrite, also continuing the sideways movement. I would say that that's pretty impressive considering that pyrite and Mexilon are still mineable from moons as well. We are currently talking 763 for the sellers and 7 ISK for the buyers. Clearly an upswing on the resource crunch and then a maintaining of that price. You'd think we'd swing either way, but here, nope, pyrite basically flat on this range. Mexilon, okay, very unexpected, but breaking out to 90 ISK here, 1 year high point, very pronounced. This could really be the nullsig bottleneck starting to reassert itself on diminishing reserves across the board here. So we started the year at 60 ISK. Mexilon, because of its unique place as I think the #1 bottleneck in nullsig. So if they just mine almost everything that they have and then produce regular stuff, the first thing they'll run out of is Mexilon. And as a result, Mexilon did not lose that much value in the period of plentiful resource availability in New Eden. This was basically coming to a real low point at 40 ISK here in the fall. Before CCP announced everything, and then when the resource crunch started, you get a little bit of a jump here to 70 ISK, but we maintained that range, which was definitely at the upper end of what we saw before for Mexilon, but not a crazy price. And this is a real surprise, but we are breaking out and getting to that 1 year high point. 94 ISK in fact for the sellers, 87.7, almost 88 ISK for the buyers. That's a really narrow margin. They are being forced up. Look at these volumes again, 2 million units, 12 million units. That is so much lower than what we saw during this time up to late last year, where these resources were plentiful, lots of recalls out there. Everything now has been nerfed, and the value of Mexilon is going up to a 1 year high point. Very impressive. Could be a good time to sell. Or do you think that again the eclipse will just exacerbate this situation? That is possible as well. It's not even volume wise, this is just supply and demand that is creating this increased value here for Mexilon because of its lack of availability. And I really do think that this means that the reserves that have been mined in this period are now starting to dry up. Next up, we've got Isogen. That went down below the 20 ISK and is actually making its way back above that. So again, we could say that just like with pyrite, which pyrite and Isogen really suffered a lot in price because of their generous availability, but also across the board, we just produced way more of that than we needed in the production cycles, and as a result, they suffered the most. Isogen used to be more expensive, quite a bit more expensive in fact than Mexilon, and it is still really just a shadow of its former self. But a little bit of a comeback, and we're back above 20 on the average price. 21.35 for the sellers, 20 ISK for the buyers. A slight spike here a couple of days ago. That's interesting. I did put that in chat when CCP was talking about the Isogen 10 thing on live stream on Twitch, is this really going to happen? Is CCP going to basically give us the ability to refine Isogen in order to increase its value and create and make that a part of the production cycles of potentially these new ships, these new weapon systems? I would mostly think that that could make sense lore-wise. Maybe it's just pure speculation, because we did of course get to a low point that was decently below 20 ISK. It's probably not me that influenced this. Next up here we've got the Noxium market that's also climbing back towards that 350 range, 340 for the sellers, 333 for the buyers. These volumes, less than 1 million on most of these sell orders, is definitely still showing that crunch. It is, in my opinion, entirely possible that we're only seeing the first signs that in Isogen, in Noxium and in Pyrite, stocks are also starting to get tested a little bit, but they're still available out there. Any increase in price can get filled very quickly with people willing to sell what they have left over from that period of plentiful. We may still be in this crunch for quite a little bit. Our back to Nullsic Minerals, here is Zydrine continuing to climb, and this one is basically back to its former glory. 1000 ISK for Zydrine, 1015 for the sellers, 965 for the buyers. This is of course a very nice comeback. 100% increase from the start of the year, from 500 to 100 ISK, and that is gonna be moon mining that is really causing this. They've been taken out almost everywhere. No more easy Zydrine and Megasite from HiSec, and as a result what we're also probably going to start to see is that the sellers will once again dictate the price. Before all of this, the price on the chart was always like smack in the middle between sellers and buyers, because you had this constant barrage of fresh sell orders that brought in 3 million, 5 million units of Zydrine and things like that. Look at this drop in volumes. Eventually, what I'm expecting to happen here is that we'll have a bit more of cartel forming. Those that have the ability to mine relatively large volumes of Zydrine and bring them to the market will bring them in bigger batches, and will say, this is the price that we're demanding. You may have a bit of competition below that, but the volumes will be next to inconsequential, and so we are really going to start to see the sell prices dictate the chart as well, because buyers down here will have a very hard time grabbing that. No one is going to dump its Zydrine when there's a lot of effort needed to bring it to a market like Jita. So 1000 ISK, we haven't seen that in a while, but this is a very, very impressive comeback. Megasite is, well, hesitating to follow the same route, but I think it is almost inevitable. Its 20-day moving average is starting to shoot straight up. 600 ISK, that's where we're at for Megasite. 620 for the sellers, 605 for the buyers. I am personally expecting it to follow that same Zydrine trend and to become more and more expensive as well. Finally, we've got the Morphite that's staying well above 17,500 as well. 17,950 for the sellers, almost 18,000 ISK, and 17,000 for the buyers. Decently normal margin, maybe a little bit smaller than normal, of 1000 ISK between these sellers and buyers, but also showing that across the board minerals are very expensive. That does mean that mining is valuable once again in EVE Online. So I think that was also the goal from CCP, and I am personally very happy to see that. From time to time, when I'm really not having any luck in exploration and things like that, I grab my Orca, mine some Veldspar, compress that, and make that ready for transportation here, which I'm all hoarding it at the moment. At the right time, we'll probably try to sell it. Right now though, we may need to decide which side gets all of these resources. Next up, the PI market coming in at 1910. And here, of course, we are probably talking a very different situation. If ISK is starting to flow into the plex stuff again and has been flowing into the mineral market for quite a bit, some sections are going to have to suffer from this, and mostly PI has been suffering from a lack of demand, which could also be a sign that, well, ISK is flowing in other markets, so where else is it going to go, or who is going to suffer from that, it would be the PI market. There's also a very different aspect, of course. PI is very AFK friendly. You just need to set up the planets, and then maybe once a day, once a week, depending on your schedule, you gotta do stuff for like a very limited amount of time, and it just start producing things across the board. So that means that it's not that easy to increase its value, such as mining, which is actually an activity that needs to be done for prolonged periods of time. So our broadcast nodes are staying below 2 million ISK on the average. Yep, sellers coming in for less than 2 million, buyers close to 1.9 million ISK. A bit of a volume increase here a couple of days ago again. This could be due to the live stream as well. We'll see if it's visible in more advanced PI materials. The reason is, of course, we got more hints at like large structure stuff for the Triglavians, also the new structure for New Eden come. How will that work? Will it require advanced PI materials? That could of course be part of the game, and as a result we could see a bit more speculation and demand in advanced PI. Construction blocks try to get back to that 11,000 ISK, and look at that, it's just not succeeding. We are staying below 10,000 on average, 10,500 for the sellers, 9,500 for the buyers. At least the margin is a bit more reasonable this time. Hopefully we can start to make our way back, but right now trading well below average. Consumer electronics is also trying to make its way back, but you can see the hesitation I feel in these daily averages that are landing on 10k quite often. 11,300 for the sellers, less than 10,000 ISK for the buyers. That's a much less reasonable margin between these two, clearly showing the lack of demand, the lack of ISK flowing in this market. Coolants next. Finally cracking, I'm going to say. It's tied to fuels, did really well to stay at that 11,500 to even 12,000 ISK average for the year, but right now it's just not gonna happen. Less than 11,000 ISK for the sellers, 10,000 ISK for the first buyer, and then we go down to 9,500 very quickly. Again, a large margin that opens up really quickly, showing the lack of demand, trading below average. Our cryoprotectant solutions have broken through the 150,000 and are continuing to decline. No new implants. This is going to normalize the market. 140,000 for the sellers, 127,000 for the buyers. And here what we do have is, I think, a bit of a slow burn that will eventually become a problem for the cryoprotectant solution market, because through all these months you did have a very nice margin, and I think a decent amount of people will have switched some production to cryoprotectant solution, but there, in my opinion, there is a certain inertia there that's going to keep them from just switching things back, because the prices are back to that 100k average, and we could really drop below that eventually because of the increased production that this, you could say, bubble will have cost, or this increased demand due to those minerals will have costs. Enriched uranium tied to fuels also showing that, yeah, these are breaking regular average, actually 13,500 ISK, something like that, in all likeliness. But right now to no avail. Summer is also coming. In my experience, summer is also always a bad place for PI, but on the other hand, the eclipse is coming now, so it's gonna be interesting to see exactly what happens. Look at these daily averages below 10,000 ISK. That's bad news. 11,840 for the sellers, 10,620 for a couple of buyers, and then we again go down to 9,000 ISK for the buyers. Very wide margin between sellers and buyers opening up, and on the wrong side, of course, on the side that shows nobody wants a lot of enriched uranium right now. Integrity response drones, we do get that spike here a couple of days ago. Hardly moves the price of the market, but 2.2 million for the sellers, less than 2 million for the buyers. But again, a noticeable spike here a couple of days ago. Mechanical parts is trying to hold on to 10,000 ISK, and is it succeeding? Nope. Sellers coming in below 10k, buyers are well below 9,000 ISK at this point. Again, right now it's almost uniform that we are seeing lower prices and a lack of demand, or a lack of ISK flowing into the PI market. Organic mortar applicators, same spike right here, slightly moving up the price, but in a very narrow way, up to 1 million ISK here. Less than that for the sellers, 915,000 for the buyers. if there is advanced PI needed in production of some of these new structures, this could be very good purchasing times and could also switch the entire market around. On the other hand, I think lots of people have been caught by this before, right? We have this speculation of these advanced PI materials right here in March that happened almost across the board, and that probably was a bit of a bubble created on the expectation that FanFest would announce new structures. We're not getting any of that, so we crashed back down. We stayed below average because all the other markets are really selling very badly at very low prices, and now we do have a volume spike, but people are very careful with overpaying for any of these advanced PI materials. It makes sense. Lessons learned, number one. Number two, everything below this tier is also suffering very badly in price. So there is no reason to all of a sudden start to pay 1.5 million or 1.3 million for organic mortar applicators at this point, because we just don't know yet. So it's a bit of a gamble. Some people seem to be taking it, and they may be right on that. On the other hand, there may still be so much in volumes and inertia in all the other markets below that it's easily absorbable, pretty much no matter what comes. The robotics are trying to get back a little bit as well, but just trying to get to 90k, which is not a great price. 86,000 to 88,000 for most sellers, 82,000 for the buyers, still very cheap as well. Self-harmonizing power cores, same spike. We were at a bottom price of around 1.8 million. What are these averages? Yeah, less than 1.8 million. We jump up to 1.9 to almost 2 million for the sellers, and we're still below 1.8 million for the buyers. So there's been some buying happening, but really only the best stuff. I think whoever did this, if we do need advanced PI materials in this next phase of the eclipse, will have a very, very good purchase. But I'm really impressed by basically the restraint here, the lack of impact on such a volume spike on the price here. So very smart buying in my personal opinion. The superconductors landed on 10k and are actually bouncing back up from that towards an average price, 12,000 for the sellers, 11,500 for the buyers. That is very reasonable. That's actually pretty impressive. And then test cultures are continuing to struggle, staying below 10,000 disc on average, 9,500 for the sellers, less than 8,000 for the buyers. Really large margin here again. Bit of an uptick in volumes, but still not a great price. And finally, we get our wetware mainframes with that spike 3 to 4 days ago again as well. But when we reached a 1-year low point. So we were well below 2 million there. We're just above 2 million for the sellers, and we're at 1.9 million for the buyers. This may just have been a bit of a perfect storm. You're seeing these new structures on the stream. New Eden come. You've got this church thing. Perhaps advanced PI materials becomes a part of it, but the buyers there were smart enough to not push the price all of a sudden to a 2.5 million 1-year high point. They said, I'm just gonna buy the cream of the crop, the lowest priced wetware mainframes, and probably a decent amount of people got their investments ready. Next up, advanced moon materials. Let's take a look at those at 28.15. Here are things heating up in nullsec. We get a little bit of slight tidbits, some titans dying and things like that, but nothing like, alright, we're massively deploying, we're gonna burn down one of the large groups or anything like that at the moment. So I'm not expecting too much. Crystalline carbonite staying slightly above average, I would say, selling for 155 almost, buyers at 141, bit margin opening up, so we're seeing some more downward pressure here. Ferrite carbides continuing to go down as well, still staying at a reasonable price range, 138 for the sellers, 136 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, maybe a touch below average, but this is nothing too special. Then we get titanium carbides continuing its struggle as well. On the other hand, compared to the others, 156 for the sellers, 153 for the buyers. Basically a harmonization, I'm going to say here, of these markets. With a bit of pressure that is visible. And then we've got tungsten carbide that spiked up last week, is already moving its way back down, staying at 200 disc though, 204 for the sellers, 190 for the buyers, but it's almost inevitable that we're gonna get back to that 175, 180 range for tungsten carbide as well. So Here I'm seeing maybe again that wait and see approach. Nobody is going to go, all right, we gotta buy or invest for Gallantry ships, we gotta invest for this or that. We know that the new ships are probably gonna be, I don't know, maybe even Upwell ships or something like that, considering that New Edencom is basically going to be all the empires with Concord against the Triglavian collective. So right now it's really hard to say I'm gonna speculate on this type of ship becoming the meta when it could be something completely new. Here we get the photonic metamaterials. Well, if you get pressure on the carbides, then you should see some pressure here as well. And we're seeing that exactly, photonic metamaterials diving back down to 15k, 15,420 for the sellers, 14,660 for the buyers. It's not in the 1 year low points, but it is clearly well below average at this point. Plasmonic metamaterials showing that pressure as well. Again, not even close to 1 year low points, but the pressure is there. 22,000 for the sellers, 20,000 for the buyers. Then we get our non-linear metamaterials. Very same thing, did break out a little bit, is now being punished for that. 22,000 for the sellers, 18,000 for the buyers. Here we get probably a little bit of oversupply that could create an opportunity. I mean, 18,000 on the chart is pretty damn low. So if you want that investment right now, non-linear metamaterials on the buy side, on the buy orders, seems to be a decent attempt. Then we get our Terrorist metamaterials, very same pattern again, 21,150 for the sellers, 20,000 for the buyers, much more reasonable margin right here. But that pressure is pretty uniform. Let's see if it stays the same across the board here. Fermionic condensates clearly going back down towards 80,000 disc, 82 for the sellers, 70,000 for the buyers, again showing that pressure. Ferrogel back down below 40,000 disc on this 1 year chart. It's really not doing well. Full arides did spike up here. We had one exception, kept pulling away from 1,000 disc, finally broke out to 1,500, even more, 1,750 here. But then of course supplies do find their way to the market. 1,200 for the sellers, 1,100 for the buyers is still very respectable on this 1 year chart though. Hypersynaptic fibers continuing to struggle, staying well below average. Nanotransistors, let's take a look at that, showing a little bit of pressure and going back down below 6,000 disc. Our phenolic composites back down below 2,000 disc as well. So you can see across the board in advanced PI materials we've got a little bit of pressure. I'm hoping that this will translate to a lot more supply in Tech 2 ships, where we can then perhaps finally see some low points and some buy opportunities. These are coming in at 32.35. Let's get on those Tech 2 ships. As always, we'll start with the Ares. I thought it was under pressure last week, and yep, we are confirming that this is continuing. Now 25 million on the chart and below that on a couple of days. Look at that lack of demand, that's interesting. 25 million, still 47 of them coming in here. Less than 23 million for the buyers. Try to get 23 million to show up on this chart right down here. Would make sense to try and grab a few Ares at this point, in my opinion. Basilisk, that's too early, is staying at that 230 million range, 240 for the sellers, 220 for the buyers. Logistics cruisers, honestly, this could also be part of that wait and see pattern that I'm seeing in the economy right now. What will you still want to be ready with? It is going to be logistics, because we don't know what and where the Triglavians are going to hit us. Will the drifters get involved? What's going to happen? Nobody knows. And so do you need lots of Ares ships? Not necessarily, but some logistics, that might definitely be interesting. Cerberus is also holding, I think, also a very strong PvE platform. Maybe it's the cruiser market that needs a bit more time. We're talking 260 million for the sellers, 240 for the buyers. Definitely a slightly above average price here, and we are staying at that range. The Crow is going back down. We get a weird data point that's making things a bit more difficult, but we're clearly trading at the lower end. Sellers are coming in at 28.5 million. We still have 215 of them down here. Buyers are coming in at 24.4 million. So you are buying Crows for less than 25 million at this point. Let's try to get that going. That's definitely below the entire chart. Would make sense to try and grab a few Crows as well, in my opinion. The Guardian, alright, bit of confirmation here that logistics do seem to be something that people want. Perhaps they're expecting that you really want fleet activity when it comes to what happens in the eclipse. 322 million for the sellers, 232 million for the buyers. Very nice sell opportunity. Do I hold a Guardian? No, unfortunately not. No, I was trying to buy that Guardian for 184. It never triggered. Can you imagine if I actually managed to grab that or was a bit more aggressive? I think at 290 I would have grabbed one. 190. There we go. 320 million for the Guardian right now. That would have been so good. Unfortunately, that trade never materialized. Next up here we've got the Hawk continuing to stay below average, but not really pronouncing that 1 year low point. 37 million for the sellers, 32.3. That is not a lot though. 32.3. You could try a Hawk as well. And here we're starting to see frigates. Is it suffering from oversupply? Yeah, 82, 10. That's still a decent amount of them. You could definitely risk buying maybe one Hawk, have it ready for PvE, or be ready for speculation on potentially another upswing. The Heretic is finally moving back up a little bit, back up above 60 million, 65 for the sellers, 53 for the buyers. These just are not moving at all. So you could sell if you bought really cheaply, but I think that would be too early. Next up here we get the Hound, staying around the 25 million, in fact below that a couple of days ago, so we should see some pressure here as well. 26 million for the sellers, 23 million for the buyers. We still have 333 down here and some competition below that. 23 million, let's get that on the chart. It's not a 1 year low point, but it is definitely at the lower end here. You could try to grab a cheap Hound. The Ishtar is staying above 230. Yep, managing to do so. 231 for the sellers, 213 for the buyers. So the cruisers are apparently still in a good spot. Let's see what the Manticore is doing. Staying below 30 million. 30 million for the sellers, 26 million for the buyers. And I think I was trying to buy these for 25 million. Do I still see my buy order here? No, I think I may have grabbed these Manticores at 25 million, which I feel like the Manticore is always a little bit difficult to trade in, because it is like slightly more expensive than the other stealth bombers. Also has like slightly different pattern where it's not as predictable on which price range is gonna start to bounce off of. So I'm trying, but I feel like it's slightly difficult to trade in it. Munin is trying to stay above 230. Is it succeeding? No, 226 million for the sellers, 204 for the buyers. Decent margin here. You could buy it, but I really don't like it in volumes compared to some of the frigates. Nemesis staying above 25 million. That's unfortunate. 27.5 million for the sellers, 23 million for the buyers. We just are not seeing the volumes, so I would say nope, the Nemesis is not going to be my primary focus here. The Oneros is going back down. 207, it's just the buyers here, down to 182.5 million. Could you try to grab a cheap one? Sure. Will you have an easy time selling them? No, because of these terrible volumes, of course. Purifier back down below 30 million ISKs. There could be opportunities here. 28 million for the sellers. Not that big in volumes, unfortunately, but less than 24 million for the buyers. Try to get that showing up on the charts. We're talking around here. That is not so bad, so a Purifier could definitely be an option as well. Saber staying really low on the chart, 62.5 million, right around its sell prices. Buyers up to 56.5 million. Scimitar also jumping back up a little bit. There we go. Some logistics are in vogue. 240 million for the sellers, 221 for the buyers. Is a Zarmast following suit? Yeah, actually going up in price as well, up to 400 million ISK, 408 for the sellers and 329 for the buyers. If you wanna help out the Triglavians, of course, what better sign of respect than to fly one of their ships? But here, Tech 2 ship market, pretty interesting. Quite a few frigates oversupply is going back down in price. I don't necessarily think this is going to stop considering what's happening in the advanced moon materials, but the cruisers and especially the logistics cruisers do seem to be in high demand at the moment. I'm gonna say there's quite a bit of preparations for potential fleets depending on whatever happens with the eclipse that's happening in the Capsuleer player base right here. But yeah, Hawk, Ares, Crow, Hound, and Purifier all look pretty interesting with very low buy prices. Next up, the Tick 3 ship market. That's coming in at, let's just say 40 minutes round. Like that, and let's see if our recovery is continuing or what's happening. Well, we get the Confessor that's definitely moving back up a little bit, getting to 50 million ISK for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers. They've been forced up. Supply wise, it's actually not a lot in the last 24 hours, just have one new sell order. So basically the Confessor is going back up in price because all supplies are going somewhere else, and we're pushing the price back up to 50 million ISK. The Hecate is doing the same thing, in fact going up above 50 million ISK. We're not saying that this is like a volume purchase or anything like that. Same thing with the Confessor, actually lower volumes, higher prices, so just a lack of supply that is starting to be felt here as well. 58 million for the sellers. Some are starting to come in trying to take advantage of that, and 49 million for the buyers. So this is actually interesting to see this move back up here to almost 60 million for the Hecate. Then the Jackdaw went from 60 and is going back down to 50 million. ISK here 47 in fact for the sellers, 42 million for the buyers, and still a decent amount of supply. That's a bit of a surprise. This is still not a predictable market. We're still basically suffering the consequences of all of that volatility that we had before, and then this Vapel is actually going back down towards interesting territory. I'm gonna say less than 40 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers, but it is still the least popular one. So should you buy these, I would say only if you have a very clear sign that any and all supplies are going to go to all of these other ships. So you could buy for 35 million. Well, these are selling for 50 million. You're not really seeing a lot of supply. Supply is in the Hecate, that's selling for 58. Jackdaw is selling for 47 and is still being supplied. This is the one worry. Now, if the Jackdaw was at 47 million and then we had nothing in the last 24 hours, that's where I would say, okay, supplies are going to go to that Hecate 60 million. We'll plug that gap, but the Jackdaw will go up, the Confessor will go up, and that should drive this Vapel back up. But that massive amount of supply in the Jackdaw is basically keeping me from saying that that's what's going to happen. We could just see more supplies and a lower average price for all of them, and then this Vapel may already be at that spot at this point. So I would be very careful gambling on this Vapel decline being an opportunity to buy low and then to sell higher, because all of this Jackdaw supply is a bit of a problem. On the cruiser front, we've got the Legion that is continuing to stay around 150 million ISK, 152 to 138 supply-wise. This is nothing too crazy, so this could really move very quickly. Next up here, we've got the Loki, also staying in its current range, 175 for the sellers, 159 for the buyers. Again, supply-wise, nothing special, in fact, in the last 24 hours. Just a couple of ships up here at the 185 mark, so this again could move very quickly. After that, we've got the Proteus that is trying to stay at like, let's say 170, 175-ish on the chart, 167 for the sellers though, and a bit of supply is already starting to drive the price back down very quickly. 150 for the buyers, so here slightly above average, but again showing that just a couple of ships can move this market very quickly. And then the Tango is the opposite. That one is actually going back down in price a little bit. 167 for the sellers, 157 for the buyers. This is quite a bit of supply that is driving that down in the last 24 hours, but look at the volumes. 111, 8 here, and everything else is really not a lot. So this is basically a very difficult tick tree market. It's been like that all the time. This could very easily be manipulated. One big entity deciding they want a Tengu fleet could really drive those prices back up all of a sudden. But on the other hand, a couple of producers or a speculator dumping 24 ships could also crash these prices back towards the low point. So very, very difficult market to gamble on, in my opinion. I did buy a Legion for 135 on this downtrend here. I mean, it was a very pronounced 1 year low point, but I would be very careful with speculating in the cruiser market. The destroyer market, I think, will end up normalizing and become a bit more predictable, but unfortunately, Confessor went up to 80 million ISK, Hecate went up to almost 90 million ISK, Jackdaw went up here to 70 million ISK, and we are basically still trying to recover from these waves, and there's still weird stuff happening. I mean, the Jackdaw seeing all of the supply in the last 24 hours when it is the least expensive of these three makes very little sense, and as a result, I personally don't think that these prices are where the market is going to settle. I think we will settle lower than this current range. And then for the extra product this week, well, we're going to go back to the faction battleships to see if we can spot any trends there, coming in at 45.25. Like that, so we need to go to ships, battleships, faction battleships. We'll start with the pirate ones. Here is the Bargis chart, staying at 900 million ISK. Actually, I feel like that's quite expensive. 1 billion ISK for a Bargis, 829 million for the buyers. Not a lot of supply here. So despite, well, the chart is also showing that it is decently expensive, but this feels like a lot of ISK for the ship. Macarel going for 450 million. Look at that, half the price of a Bargist. And it is still clearly trading at a very high point. 462 million for the sellers, 415 for the buyers. Feels much more reasonable. I think this is where I tend to buy my faction battleships at. Then here we get the Nestor. That is getting back to that 500 million range, but definitely feels rather reasonable as well. 500 for the sellers, 456 million for the buyers. The Nightmare is going for 550 million, so these are definitely up in price a little bit as well. Almost 600 for the sellers, 530 for the buyers. This is also a PvP platform though. Nightmare is definitely part of the meta. Nightmare fleets are really cool to watch as well. Balgorn increasing in value, but look where we come from, of course. We're talking 310 million for the sellers on not a lot of supply, 294 for the buyers. I wonder if you could make this into like a PvE platform. Bonus to stasis webifier optimal range, so you've got those longer webs. Energy neutralizer, that's not really useful in PvP. 1% bonus to large energy turret damage. Drain target ship regardless of your own. So this is really a PvP platform. I kind of like the web bonus though. That could be very interesting. Where are we talking about? 4 beams or 4 turret slots, 7 highs. Yeah, this is built for PvP. This is going to be very difficult to make that in like an anti-Triglavian ship. Who knows if capacitor warfare could work on like the new Eden-Com Triglavian conflict. It could become more interesting, but that's a very, very big gamble to take. On the other hand, it's only 300 million, definitely not that expensive for a faction battleship. Rattlesnake is, of course, you're paying a premium for that because it is probably the best PvE platform outside of maybe something like a Golem. The Marauders above 700 million ISK and staying there, 755 for the sellers, 680 for the buyers. But once you get there, you're basically in endgame for stuff like the Conduits, stuff like fighting against the Triglavians, honestly, patrols and invading systems. You can maintain yourself quite a little bit, gather all that loot, gather all that salvage. So it is just an incredible PvE platform. And then the Vindicator is actually really expensive as well, because 691 for the sellers and 632 for the buyers. Probably the same reason. The Vindicator is an incredible platform against the right content, and the Triglavians tend to get in really close on your ship. The Vindicator can then easily web them to a crawl and then just blab them with their large large blasters. So it is more expensive, I think, for the same reason that the Rattlesnake is. Let's take a look at the Navy faction ships next, see if we can spot any trends here. Apocalypse Navy issue, I'm gonna say expensive at 450 million ISK, for 40 for the sellers, 375, so almost that on the chart. Definitely at the high end here, showing expensive LP, so that should mean, you know, not a lot of LP income for Minmatar, but let's keep in mind, of course, all of this has changed substantially. The PvE LP rewards have been nerfed, and it's all about the PvP part. So we'll see if basically the trend continues, that it's very hard to say what's happening in faction warfare from what's happening with the prices of these faction ships. Armageddon Navy issue, also high up though, sometimes even trading above 500 million ISK, yeah, on a complete lack of supply. Anything, nope, just one selling for 510, 401 million for the buyers. Clearly a bit of a drought, showing that yeah, there's not that much LP being produced here. Here we've got the Dominics, that's also up in price, 500 million ISK, 520 on not a lot of supply, 460 for the buyers. Very, I'm gonna say actually expensive. On this 1 year chart it's not that expensive, but definitely away from that 350 bottom here, that would have been very juicy. Megatron Navy issue also getting back on that 500 million range, in fact 588 million for the sellers, 446 for the buyers. So are the rest of these the exact opposite? Let's take a look. Raven Navy issue, no, above 500 million ISK as well. 550 for the sellers, 452 for the buyers. So this really looks like there is a revalorization across the board. Faction Warfare LP is far more expensive all of a sudden. At this point. Scorpion Navy issue also going for 450 million ISK, 475 for the sellers, 419, 420 million for the buyers, very expensive. And then our Minmatar are also going up. They're probably still the least popular, so 400 million for the Tempest Fleet issue, but it is very close to 1 year high point. And the Typhoon Fleet issue actually struggling, but staying at 400 million ISK as well. Very, very interesting. Clearly showing that LP across the board though is very expensive. That Raven Navy issue is a 1 year high point above 500 million ISK, and the Dominics is actually also at 500 million ISK. You would usually see like that opposite movement due to LP availability, but this does not seem to be the trend anymore, because you need that PvP in order to get that going. So where could the opportunities lie now? Of course, on really big battles where lots of LP floods the market, you could then get a flood of items that will go down in price. Buying them then to wait for things to die down a little bit could be good. And so here we're no longer looking at which faction is winning, but are we in high activity in faction warfare? Yep, should mean lots of LP, should mean cheaper stuff. Or are we going in lower activity, which should make things more expensive? Could be very interesting, of course, to change that dynamic, but it also does look like right now we're not making as much LP as before in faction warfare. So that's my read on this situation. That's also going to make it for this EVE Talk. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.